Welcome, everybody. My name is Greg Brzezinski, and I am the director of the Seeger Center for Asian Studies and the Asian Studies program here at the Elliott School of International Affairs. I just want to briefly introduce our center. The purpose of the Seeger Center is to promote research in teaching about Asia and to improve the quality and scope of research about Asia, and also to promote dialogue between the academic community and the policy community relating to Asian issues. I'm actually very excited about today's event with the 228 Memorial Foundation. It is a pleasure and an honor to be co-hosting this event with the foundation. I actually teach a section about the 228 incident in our my history, memory, and violence class, and it's actually an important part of the Asian Studies curriculum, so that every student who gets a degree in Asian Studies from the Elliott School learns about this incident. I'm actually just going to briefly introduce our moderator, and then our moderator will later introduce our speakers, and then I will turn it over to Professor Sweat, who prepared, I believe, pre-recorded remarks. But the moderator for today's event is going to be Professor Da-Ching Yang. He is a professor of history and international affairs here at the Elliott School, and a noted expert on Japan and Japanese colonialism in Asia. So why don't, I'll leave the staff to put on the pre-recorded video, and then we can turn it over to Professor Yang. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Here, this one is correct.
他是佛经大学安列特国际事务学院布拉林斯基院长，杨大庆教授，还有台湾教育研究中心陈海欣教授，东亚国际资源中心约卡专案经理，非常感谢会校教师及相关人员跟我们台湾228基金会共同来办理这个重要的盛会。乔治华盛顿大学是一个创立超过200年的重要的国际大学，而安列特国际事务学院更是顶尖的国际关系学院之一啊。那么，对于美国政府外交人才的培养以及相关政策的提供，扮演着相当重要的角色。而台湾教育研究中心也开了很多关于台湾历史、文化和社会的课程，那么典藏了台湾民主化历程相关的档案文献，还包括大量的党外期刊的资料库。那么，在整个国际情势影响下，整个国际社会对台湾的关注比过去更为的重要。而228事件不仅是战后台湾重要的人权事件，我想也是让国际社会认识台湾、理解台湾整个战后历史发展的重要的切入点。 这也是这一次论坛办理的重要意义。这样重要的盛会，我本来应该亲自来参与。那拜托本会的董事，也是前台湾教授协会的会长许文堂教授率团来参加这一场会议，这一点实在非常的抱歉，也请各位与会的贵宾可以谅解。更重要的是，期盼这一次的论坛能够开启228基金会跟贵院台湾教育研究中心长期合作发展的契机。相信透过这个论坛的举办，有助于美国学界对战后台湾史，特别是228事件作为一个重大人权事件的理解，而在自由民主人权的共同价值上，能够开启我们共同努力的目标。谢谢大家，预祝今天的会议圆满成功。
So as Dr. I'm actually young. I teach Modern Taiwanese History at Washington University. It is a great honor to be part of this very important event. And I would like to thank the Modern Taiwanese Memorial Foundation for choosing TW for this event, also giving us this their publication in English. As Dr. Brazil mentioned, we at TW and especially at the Elliott School are very interested in exploring the role of the past in shaping the present and future. And with my colleagues, I also take part in teaching courses like history, memory, violence in Asia, and also I currently teach the course on the issues of history in international affairs. And I'm glad to see some of the students are present here. As a student and historian of modern Japan, naturally, I'm no stranger to studying conflicts, violence, as well as memory and reconciliation. So with my other colleague, Professor Mochizuki, we set up a program within the Center for Asian Studies under the title Memory, Reconciliation in Asia Pacific. And personally, I also studied the violence in World War II, so I'm not a stranger to the difficulties in coming to terms with both the historical truth as well as the justice after the event. So I very much appreciate having this opportunity to read, but also to hear the presentations by two distinguished researchers. The issue of transitional justice doesn't concern Asia, obviously. Since the 1980s, this is a global phenomenon represented by South Africa's Truth Reconciliation Commission, but also the many other newly democratized countries, including the Republic of Korea. I just heard that we have some students from Korea sitting here, and of course, there's also a broader regional context. So without further ado, I would like to present the two speakers. The first is Dr. Xu, speaking first. He's currently the director of the Modern Foundation February 28th in Taiwan. He's also a associate research fellow at the Institute of Modern History at the Academia Center. This is the premium institutions of research in Taiwan. He earned his PhD from University of Paris, And he will be followed by Dr. Chenjia Hao, who is a Associate Research Fellow at the Memorial Foundation of the Reformed. Dr. Chen is also an adjunct assistant professor at the Graduate Institute of Taiwanese History at the National University. He earned his PhD from the Graduate Institute of Taiwan History at the National University. So, Dr. Xu, the floor is yours.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Professor Yang Ta-Ching, thanks for your very kindly introduction to me. Today it's a great pleasure to me to have an opportunity to introduce this released academic publication for you. And of course, this publication was published by our foundation. So today I would like to give you about 15 minutes of the outline of the book and the background about why we published this book and why, and more important, is why we choose United States, we choose GW as the partnership to call operation with this event. Okay, so our foundation is established in the 1994 according to the special legislation addressing the aftermath of the total incident. And our foundation, following our foundation established in the first beginning stage of our foundation, the mission of in the early stage of our foundation was to mainly to distribute to give the compensation to those victims and their families, and we hold a commemorating event to memory and consoling the victims. And in the recent, the mission of our foundation have transit. In recently, our foundation, the main mission of foundation was to pursuing the transitional justice and to launch the research related to the historical truths of the 228 incident. And then our foundation was located at Taipei City, and now the headquarters of our foundation was at a museum, the National 228 Memorial Museum, okay, which located a place very close to the president's office. Okay, so our museum was a very beautiful historical building. So next time, if you guys have opportunity to visit Taiwan, don't forget to contact me, contact our foundation. I will promise to will arrange a very impressive historical tour for all of you. So okay, so as I mentioned earlier, in recently, our foundation main focus on the memorial, main focus on the to launch the research on the transitional justice for the 228 incidents. And in order to achieve this goal, our foundation has established a research team in with the title Truth and Transitional Justice of 228 incidents in 2007. And this research team, we invite a lot of distinguished scholar research in Taiwan, and invite them to write a paper based on the newly unearthed historical materials. And we try to explore those aspects which is overlooked in the previous studies. So I would like to highlight that exactly why our foundation have do this work. That was not only because we think it's necessary to do, but we also want to respond our present requirements. In the 2018, at that year's marks the 71st anniversary of the 228 incident, and at that year, our president Tsai Ing-wen attended the nation memorial ceremony and stated that the Taiwanese transitional justice investigation must meet the international standards. So this kind of requirement by our president encouraged our foundation to launch a large translation project. I mean, the research team I mentioned earlier have finished completed research results in 2020, and the result is in the left-hand side of the slide. Of course, it's with Chinese writing. So then we launched the large scale of translation project. So our the first result of the translation project is English Japanese version book, and the book is you can see the book in the right side of the slide. And exactly, however, the primary goal of this project was to translate the Chinese version into English. So that was why we have this book. So why we think English is so important? This was not because English is an international language, but because the study of the 228 was initiated by the English academic world. Oh, and I can say it more precisely by the American academics. You ask me, what was the first book related to the 228? My answer was this book, George Kerr, and who wrote this book in 1965, published this book in 1965. And you may want to know who is George Kerr. George Kerr he was considered as the Taiwan expert. He went to Taiwan in 1937. At that time, Taiwan still under the Japanese rule. At that time, Taiwan still was a colony of Japanese empire, and he teaching English in Taipei during 1937 to 1940, and then he back to United States, and then he returned to Taiwan again in 1946 to serve as vice consul in Taipei consulate. So the 228 incident was happened in the following year, in the 1947. So that means George Kerr has the opportunity to eyewitness the process of the 228 incident. So when he back to the United States, he tried to collecting those his own memory intertwined with those historical material which collect in the United States, and to write this book. Of course, this book was very sharply criticized the KMT rule in Taiwan. However, this book became an important channel for understand the 228 at that time. I mean, exactly after the 228 happened in Taiwan society, you cannot talk about the 228 in public until the martial law was lifted in 1987. That means the 228 became a political taboo in Taiwan for a long-term period. So if you so at that time, the overseas Taiwanese people very have a very strong in idea, okay, willing want to know what happened during the 228 incident. So this book gave those overseas Taiwanese, sorry, gave those overseas Taiwanese have opportunity to know what is 228, and so the overseas Taiwanese book use this book as a foundation to promote, to launch the commemorating event of the 228. Of course, later we will realize that the 228 instance somehow was very close intertwined with the Taiwan independence movement. So you can say that this book also laid the foundation for overseas Taiwanese people to pursuing the Taiwan independence. So, okay, so in the later, the 1991, another important book published in the United States, that was the A Church Beginning, which was regarded as the first academic book published in the 1991. And this book has accepted the peer review by the Stanford University, and this book also published by the Stanford University. But I would like to highlight that if you notice the background of the authors, the three authors of the book, maybe you will wonder, does the narrative of this book, so how should I evaluate the narrative of this book? Or you can imagine what kind of narrative of this book will offer for us. The first author was Roman Mayers, who was a senior fellow at the institution at the time, a very not scholar of history, economics, and the politics of Asia. But exactly, I have to say, the Roman Mayer always be considered as the provocative scholar. And then the second author is Lai Zehan. He got his PhD also from a university of the United States. And at that time, he served as the research fellow of Institute of Sanminzhuyi at Academia Sinica. So you can know Sanminzhuyi is the principle. So okay, he also be considered as Taiwanese domestic scholars for KMT. And then the final author was Wei who at that time who was the vice chairperson of Cultural Work Committee. Until today, a lot of people criticize the narrative of this book. Okay, so but I don't want to criticize of this book because this book is very important. It was a first academic book related to the 228 incident. But however, in the past 30 years, we cannot find the second academic book written by English, and so that was why we feel so. We have a mission to publish this English version. This was not only, we think we have to offer a new academic book for those English studies, for those first language was those guys whose first language was English. But the more important is we think we should provide another historical narrative that was a little different with the A Church Beginning. And then I hope you can do a conversation with our new book, our newly released book, and the Church Beginning. Okay, so then you can start to recite. You can maybe you will wonder who should take the responsibility of the 228, or how many people killed in the 228, how was the spy, I mean the intelligence agency played a role in during the Two-way incident. Okay, those interesting issue. Okay, you can realize those issue through do a comparating reading by our new book and the church beginning. And our book was content. Our book give you about 5 dimensions. Okay. In the first, we give you a narrative, a historical narrative at the during the Two-way incident. I mean, following the Two-way incident happened, or you can more precisely, following the Two-way massacre occurred. So how did the KMT government express what caused the Two-way, and what did the Taiwanese people, I mean the civilians, how was their attitude toward the incident? And then we will give you international context, and later the leader of our direction, Professor Xu Wentang, will give you a very impressive presentation on this issue and the aspects, and then the societal aspect, and the final dimension maybe will attract the Professor Yang Taqing's attention. It was related to the reconciliation of the Two-way incidents in Taiwan society. Okay, so that was my very shortened presentation about the outlook of this book. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm quite nervous. I wish I could speak French instead of English, because if I speak terrible accent. So, mais seulement vous comprenez, n'est-ce pas? Vous note, I use the term 228 massacre instead of an incident. Why? Of course, 228 incident is an official term used by the government from the 1992. But eventually, I insist to use massacre, because in the official report of the 1992, the scholars say there were 28,000 victims die in this short period. That's a massacre. And from the report of newspaper in this time, like New York Times or China Review Weekly, or Times of London, they say it's intentional murder of the youth, or a generation of elite of Taiwan. So yeah. Now that's the cover of the Economist in the issue of 1st May 2021, the most dangerous place on earth, that means Taiwan. But the same journal say Taiwan is the most 10 of the most free country of the world, successively from 2018 to 2022. And also, the House of Freedom of the states say the same thing. Taiwan is totally free country. But this country suffer okay, thank you. The lack of identity, national identity, national recognition by the international society. That's the beginning of the injustice of the whole thing. In 1945, the end of the World War II, there is a 4 step of the end of the war. The first is the surrender on 14th August, and then take over for Taiwan in 1945. On 10th September 1945, and then occupation on 25th October. And it should be a liberation, but soon Taiwanese are deceived. Why comes the Chinese to Taiwan? It's from the General Order number 1 of the President Truman to MacArthur, and then to Chiang Kai-shek, and then to the Minister of Defense, Ho Ying-chin, and then to Chen Yi. That means the Governor General of Taiwan. You can see the mark in red. Chiang Kai-shek is responsible for the occupation of Formosa and the French Indochina, north of 18th north latitude. There's for the occupation, you should have a plan. And this plan comes from the Army of the United States. And the preparation is just like this. There is a course for the official. Most of them are written by George Kerr. And here is the ceremony of the acceptance of surrender on Missouri battleship. I give you the image quickly. That's the instrument of surrender. Here is the acceptance of surrender in Nanjing by Ho Ying-chin. You see the signature of the Okamura, Yoshiji, and Ho Ying-chin, secretary. And this is a translation of the plan of the occupation of Taiwan. Why I say translation? Because it's written first by the Army of the United States. Okay. And then it's acceptance of surrender by government general Cheney from Andariki. That means there is a position, hierarchical of the orders. And the first coming of the Allied power is United States Army investigation for prison of war. There were about 1,500 persons in Taiwan. And then comes the OSS unit for the data. OSS means Organization of Secret Service of Army. And then in mid-September, investigation for missing in action person. And at last, the first Chinese official arrived at Taipei in the end of September. And then there is a group, a Formosa liaison group of United States, and comes to army, Chinese army, to Kaohsiung and Keelung by the battleship of United States. We can see in the red circle, that's mean Formosa liaison of United States. It's parallel with the GHQ in Taiwan. That's the instrument of surrender. So the occupation of Formosa does not transfer sovereignty of Taiwan. That's the international law of peacetime and wartime repeated by many textbooks. I cite 2 or 3 books. They say the same things. Military occupation does not transfer sovereignty of occupied zone or occupied force to the occupied force. Only a right to exercise a certain sovereignty right is granted. And for the few manual of United States Army, Article 255, occupation does not transfer sovereignty. It repeats and repeats. Every country recognizes this international law. And for open hand international law, say the same things. But when Chinese arrived to Formosa, they exercise triple control. The first one is military administration, and the second one is martial law. And this martial law is sentenced till 1987, the second long last martial law of the world. And the third one is provisional regulations or period of national mobilization for the suppression of communist rebellion. It's a long and ordinary war, but it's the most terrible law to control the whole Taiwan people. That's the first talk of Chinese and Japanese in Taipei. We can see 4 flags of Allied powers. That means in the form of their Soviet Union, United States, China, and the British. At first, Taiwanese welcomed Chinese to liberate them from the Japanese colonialization. But soon they found it's a government of corruption and incapable for good management and good governance. We can see the signature of few guests, American. That means Chinese are representative by the Allied power for acceptance of this ceremony. We can see also in the ceremony the 4 flags of the Allied power. And there is a delegation of the Allied powers. This is Japanese Governor General under Hiichi and his General Isayama Haruki. And it's a trainee to accept the order number 1. We see the mass outside of the public hall because they welcome Chinese. They're eager to know the result of the ceremony. But when Chen Yi, the Governor General, announced all the Formosan became Chinese in this day, but they ask, when they ask United States Department to recognize the Taiwan's sovereignty governed by China, the response is this transfer may ultimately be determined by appropriate treaty arrangement. That means later it's San Francisco Peace Treaty with Japan in 1951. For the British government, the same attitude toward Taiwan's sovereignty is say the Allied power could not transfer the sovereignty of Taiwan from Japan to China on their own, but should wait for the conclusion of a peace treaty. That's the archive of this issue. And then 1 year later, that's mean 1947, the outbreak of 228 massacre. There's so many criticized for Dr. Alan Shackleton of the United States Rescue and Relief agents in Taipei. He reported United States mistakes in handling Taiwan to China. And the New York Times say the outbreak of incident could caused by serious corruption, incompetence of the administrative officials, and the rapidly impoverishment of Taiwanese. And then, in the deaths of more than 10,000 people, especially the policy of killing of all the best people, and the massacre in Kaohsiung and Pingtung were particularly serious. That's the New York Times. And also China Weekly Review. The report, it's the first journalist who comes to Taiwan in early March of 1947. He reported, Powell, he reports that the order of the whole island is maintained by the people, Formosan people, of course, and describes the deception of Governor General Chen Yi. He said the army arrived in Keelung on 8th March that afternoon, and Taipei at 9, causing a brutal bloodbath massacre. Finally, journalist Powell stressed that the people of Taiwan demand a United Nations mandate preferable by the United States. And the Washington Post has some report too. Early in March 1940 years, that's mean 1 year before, there is already a report that the Chinese in Taiwan will behave just as they accuse the Russian of with soldiers stopping people in the street and robbing them, etc. China's rule over Taiwan is far worse than Japan's, and the future peace treaty negotiations should consider allowing Formosa to be returned to Japan or the United Nations. And then point out the massacre in Formosa. Precisely, there are some use emasculation, cutting off ears, blame on Chinese. That's in the end of March 1947. And then also in April, it's a Formosan scandal, and Pittsburgh Press too reports the tragedy of Taiwan. And according British Council Tingle, the Taiwanese hope that foreign country could help them to become self-governing. The best solution was to separate Formosa to China. The people of Formosa should be allowed to hold a referendum. And he said also the Chinese army shoot blindly and indiscriminately. The Times of London report the official victim, the statistic number. It's 1,860 killed civilian. For the Manchester Guardian, they also report the coercion and the oppression to Taiwanese. But Chiang Kai-shek, did he realize the status, the legal status of Taiwan? He knew. In 1949, he criticized Chen Cheng, the new government general. In a press conference that Chen Yi said, Taiwan was a stronghold for the suppression of the Communist Party was inappropriate and should be based on the central government policy to avoid any misunderstanding by foreign government. And he said, before the peace conference with Japan, Taiwan's legal status and the sovereignty were merely the nature of a trustee territory of our country. So how can it be said to be the last bastion for the suppression of the communist and the basic of national base of the national revival? It's maniacal, very which should be laughed at by those who has a little common sense. But after the release of the white paper by Truman administration, Chiang Kai-shek say, we will defend Taiwan to the death, secure our territory, and fulfill our national duty, and we will not hand it over to the ally. But quickly he said, okay, I will end it quickly. So, in my opinion, just because the massacre of 228, Chiang Kai-shek was not allowed to attend to the San Francisco Peace Conference. So, but what happened? In the conference, in this peace treaty with Japan, the Article 2B, Japan renounced all right, title, and claim to Formosa and the Pescadores. And Japan also has a peace treaty with the government of the Republic of China, say the main things Japan has renounced, but didn't say Japan give Taiwan to. So the attitude of government of the Republic of China, of course, is KMT for the long time in accordance to Carroll Communique, Declaration of Potsdam, Instrument of Surrender. The ROC was restore the territory acquired by Japan through invasion and the unequal treaty, not grounding foreign territory, and the two situations were completely different. There is nothing to do with military occupation. But for the DPP government, Republic of China and the People's Republic of China are two different countries. For the James Crawford on the status of Taiwan in his creation of states in international law, Taiwan is not, is in fact met all the requirements for statehood except for national recognition. But because the government of Taiwan has never explicitly the state to the outside world that Taiwan is an independent country. So thank you. I have spent too much time to present. Thank you.
I mentioned that a lot of Congress. So compliment. Since this is your plans to translate the other chapters as well as the 2006 study, because I think they will all have a contribution to our understanding. For example, one of the chapters that was not translated focused on the victims of non-island, non-Benjamin, and it shows that number one, the numbers have been exaggerated, and number two, half of those were actually killed by the government troops. So I think that it has done such a thorough job, and in contrast, at least in this volume, we don't have a similarly thorough investigation of all the victims of the Benjamin. Of course, that's a much larger task. So that is one question, but related to this, since Dr. Chen, you mentioned the 1991 Stanford University Press, and you invited others to compare the two. Now, obviously, a lot more documents have come to the public thanks to efforts by government and by civil society. So my question for you is, do you think as more documents become available, the gaps in interpretation, in understanding of the 228 has become narrow or somehow remain constant. Because it's one thing to say, okay, we can get a number, but it's more difficult to say what caused something to happen. It's not always clearly stated in the document. And this comes from my own study of events like the Nanjing massacre. So this is a question for Dr. Chen. For Dr. Xu, your presentation draws from your chapter in this book. I invite all of you to take a quick look. And I think it revealed the immediate reaction by many Westerners to the brutality in the February 28th. It's very interesting that the New York Times reporter who was not in Taiwan was the same reporter who reported Japanese atrocities in Nanjing in 1937. He's still in 30. Yeah, it was a coincidence. And I think it shows it's not just on the part of the population of Taiwan, but also on at least some or many international observers. This event greatly alienated the local population. And then your second part talked about the legal status. And here's my question. You mentioned that Chiang Kai-shek and the Republic of China was not invited to the San Francisco Peace Conference because of the 228. I'm a little bit confused because what I have learned is that it's because of the Cold War that initially Britain was interested in inviting People's Republic of China, and the United States was in favor of Republic of China, Taiwan, and then as a result, neither was invited. But that's a more technical question. The bigger question is, without the treaty, as you mentioned, that is supposed to finalize the legal status, would de facto control based on those declarations, namely Cairo or and Potsdam Declaration, what is that significance? Because again, when I'm teaching the disposal of Japanese empire, I can think of other territories such as Southern Sakhalin, which was reoccupied by the Soviet Union. It was given to Japan after 1905, after the Russo-Japanese War, but reoccupied. And Soviet Union was did not sign the San Francisco Peace Treaty. But does that raise the same kind of question? Therefore, Southern Sakhalin's status is to be decided. I guess my question is also to ask, are there other cases? Of course, if an international treaty can settle everything, that would be great, right? But we live in a world that is influenced by geopolitics, Cold War, etc. But I think it's a very important article. I learned a lot from as well as this. I just hope we all have a chance to read. And also that last part of the rehabilitation movement, I think is great material for our classes, whether it's in historical wrongs, as you want to here. So both in terms of addressing historical truths as well as addressing transitional justice, I think this is a very important contribution.
Okay. Many thanks for Professor Martin's very delicate patience about in terms of the first question, should we does our foundation another plan to translate the other writing papers? Yeah, to be honest, we have such kind of plan, which will be arranged. This was because very simple reason, because this translation project has already exhausted all of our energy. So I think I have to take a rest, and I have to spend some time to consider if we have to launch another translation plan and what we should do. And exactly the another information I would like to introduce all of this is that this book not only translates, exactly we in order to respond the expectation of the native English readers. I mean, I think if you directly translate Chinese into English, sometimes you will feel some sentences will be very tricky. Yeah, so second, we are not only translate, but we are with the rewrite project. So this was why we spend a lot of time for publishing this book. We published in Japanese edition almost cost 1 year. For this book, spent our 2 years for very effort. We put a lot of effort on this book. So this was maybe this was an excuse which made me have a opportunity to take a break. But of course, I will bring your great advice to our completion. Okay, so Professor Xuantai was our director, so maybe he had power to reflect such kind of good advice to our board and to push them to consider does another translation plan is necessary or not. So this is yeah. And in terms of the second question, yeah, I think you are very sensitive to notice the issue, the controversial issue in Taiwan. So maybe someone will say that the different ethnic, or you can say the different group, or you can say the blue campaign and the green campaign in Taiwan, they seem like have different attitudes to the two-way instance. So you can say the gap still there, and the more historical archive was on Earth should bring let the gap become smaller. I think this depends on what kind of your stance. If you only stance on the politicals, so the narrow always there. But if you are stance on the ethnic, or on the if you are really trying to pursuing the social dimension, reconciliation between the different ethnic, so I think you will really benefit from those newly unearthed archives, because those archives have a little told you that, for example, to those victims, they are very eager to know why my parents or my grandparents be killed. And for example, in chapter 6, we give those answers. Your dad, for example, Zhang Qiang, a very famous doctor in Hualien, he was killed by an order made by a low-caste military officer. But in the past, we suppose maybe he was killed by an order made by Jiang Kai-shek. So there was a totally different story there. So okay, so the legal status, the legal mission of our foundation was to pursue, to seeking to promote the social reconciliation. So we try to we make a lot of effort to
balance the different different steps or different narratives. So you have mentioned that we also put effort to analyze the numbers of the victims of the members. I think that was why we did this. Yeah. So thanks.
My thanks to Professor Yang for his attentive reading. Yes. New York Times at the beginning, they don't have any reporter in Taiwan. The first journalist go to Taipei is China Weekly Review. Mr. Powell, his editor-in-chief, is go by his own way, because at the beginning, the military don't allow any person go to Taipei to report this killing. And after 10 days of killing, I think it's the first group of foreign journalists go to Taipei. So at the beginning, the foreign they can use only the second-hand news. Maybe I can compare the situation of Ukraine and the occupation of some Russian in some region of Ukraine, but this zone occupied didn't mean this Russia has the sovereignty, but de facto they control this area, just like a Crimea. Someday, maybe they have a treaty to finalize their the status. For Ukraine, with Sakhalin, the South Sakhalin. That's it's still a problem. For this year, Japan continue to talk with Russia, but for this year, Putin reject any talk with Japan. But at the beginning, in San Francisco, the rulers say we think that the islands in the north belongs to Japan, but because Russia didn't attend, they didn't sign the treaty. They attend. So, thank you.
So we just collected 3 questions. Please identify yourself before.
Well, my name is Garrett Van Rees. I'm also teaching some Taiwan-related courses here at George Washington and George Mason. Thank you very much for this topic. I also touch on it in my courses. And so it is very important to understand history of Taiwan is very pivotal moment in Taiwan's history. I have two brief comments. One is on your overview of earlier English works. I think also should be mentioned is Alan Shackleton. You mentioned Alan Shackleton, and his book Formosa Calling gives a totally independent eyewitness view of what happened. So next to George Kerr, I always mention Alan Shackleton. He was from New Zealand. He just happened to be there as a United Nations representative. And he also saw everything happening, and he wrote it up in his diary, which laid on the family shelf for many years. And then in the 90s, we were able to publish that. So that's an important one. And if I also may mention that here at George Washington, we do have a Taiwan magazine collection, and the chairman referred to it already. And in the Taiwan magazines from 1980 till 1989, there were a lot of articles about Urabá. And I think for the future, when we have this collection digitized, which is in process of being done, then that will also be a major resource for you to do research on what was written at that time. Thank you.
Yes, it's all the different things. My name is Alan John, and I'm so glad to be here. I'm an undergraduate student at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. So as a Korean person with some family ties with Japan, I really sympathize with the this complex identity of speaking, as being a part of the Japanese colonizing, which so my family managed to live in Japan, not just to make a living. And a lot of old Korean people can still sing the Japanese national anthem, speak Japanese, speak fluent Japanese. So what I was thinking about is, so a lot of KMT people came from mainland China, and they had to go through a lot of atrocities committed by the Japan, the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II. The Student Japanese War caused a lot of around 20 million casualties in mainland China, right? So I don't want to be the devil's advocate here, but I kind of see that maybe a lot of hatred coming from the KMT people when they landed in Taiwan, and Taiwanese people, native Taiwanese, the national cannot even speak fluent Mandarin. They speak Minnan or fluent Japanese, and they don't really look Japanese enough. They don't look Chinese enough of them. So my question is this, we briefly mentioned about how there were casualties from the Washington population because during the 238 massacre, and so how does that connect to Taiwan's legacy of seeking for help from Japan, having the securing the legacy of being a part of the Japanese Empire, which kind of offends a lot of people who are part of the Pan Group coalition in ROC. Thank you. Very big questions.
So is there a question thinking the compensation from Japan for Mali and Nassau?
No, I kind of see that because the book was also translated into Japanese.
I see.
So I kind of see that a lot of Taiwanese independent movement activists seek help from Japan in order to gain Taiwanese independence, but I don't really see that's the case because we also heard about the Taiwan民族 War and how Taiwan also sought independence from Japan. Well, after the Sino-Japanese War, versus the Japanese War, and we really sought it for independence. So
this is a very broad and it goes beyond the scope of the book. But there's one question he suggests that did the brutal behavior of those nationalist troops sent from mainland, was it partly a result of what they had gone through in the war with Japan. In other words, they have been brutalized through that war, and therefore they carry this kind of behavior toward the Taiwanese.
I want to know what we are really talking about. Like, the film is widely focused on democracy, but is there like anything happening events like shape modern Taiwanese national identity? And I also have students that you also mentioned like in the Washington Post, it's more China's war was far worse than Japan's. Maybe we can say that is nationalist artist rule. So I want to know if this like a widely accepted argument in Taiwan society or it's just the post view? Because I'm like looking on the Japanese colonization history over time, so I'm really curious about something.
The countries issue is on percentage of the next that's fancy. But from 1920s, now it becomes a modernized, civilized society. So, of course, in 1945, there are people of the nation, but suddenly China say, no, you are ours. How will you grab? There's no rules of the properties or any China only 20%. But in 1945, Taiwanese can read Chinese, of course, but they cannot speak Chinese. They speak only Japanese and dialogue of in Taiwan. It's different to those in Fujian. Some similar, but different. So there is a great conflict of country. So in only in 1 year, people cannot accept anymore the uncivil acts of Chinese in Taiwan. I would like to make a brief response to the comment and please, of course, comment, please, thanks. I accept all of my correct comment. And then in the future, because this was also connected with the Professor Hutchins' question mentioned earlier. If we have another translation, then I did like to have I wish we have we can make a more holistic overview of the all the English study related to A, and we can make a very good dialogue with those English study regarding to A. So I hope in the future I can have the opportunity to have to ask for your good advisor if I want to do that job at that time. Please tell me. And in terms of your French, I think I sorry my English my English ability is not so good. I have never experienced to study in overseas. You say I got my PhD from the University of Taiwan. So sorry if I misunderstanding your question. Please forgive me. But I think in my personal perspective, of our foundation perspective, we don't think if you want to really understand the situations or the background situations, the complaint which ethnic is brutal, for example, white is brutal, person is brutal, the KMT troops make a brutal behavior is the right way. I think the more important is what kind of system make problem behind the face. I think the more important is if the troops launch the brutal massacre in Taiwan, so which should be the punishment. Don't forget, in the previous year of the 228, the ROC government, or you can say the KMT government, launched ROC constitution, and the constitution was based on the liberty, democracy, and human rights. Okay, so those behavior totally against the principle of the ROC constitution. So we think though someone has been punished under the democratic constitution. Okay, so I think this is a very important the points, very important points. That was why, in my personal perspective, from our foundation perspective, I think 228 instance should be rethinking about those issues in terms of human rights and social justice or ethnic reconciliation. So if you know the problem was not people but the system, or maybe you will find a way more understanding to understand. Sorry. Well, thank you very much. Because of the limited time, we have to end our discussion here. Let's give our two speakers.
We just think probably here just to say we have books for giveaway right outside on the table, and there also there are tote bags as well. So please grab a copy of the book for your own further reading. Thanks again for coming out today, and have a great day.
You